you start to understand that your actions have consequences, and he's watching and observing that. Now, what I really I'm trying to do my best, and I failed at this, and I'm working on it, is to know that right now he's not at that age, but at some age, he's sooner rather than later, he's going to be able to articulate specific memories of things that I've done and how he felt in that moment, how that felt for him. It could feel very different than it did for me. So um, that's huge. I mean, when you talk, and I've talked to other parents where they've said, I have these moments with my son or my daughter where they're doing something and they're acting out, and I have to think about how am I going to respond to this, and how is that going to impact them psychologically? And that is just such a big question that I constantly think about. I mean, even as I'm living in the present with my son, I am living in the future with my son, and constantly thinking about things when he's able to talk and we're able to have conversations and he's able to make observations and ask me why things are the way they are. What
Mhm.
are going to be my questions to those answers? That's my wife is so good at right now and his development and everything like that,
Yeah.
where I am so focused on the future and when he's older, when he's like 6 years old and above,
Yeah.
that's where my mind's at. So I think the fact that her mindset's in a different mindset than mine probably is a really, really good thing. Because if we were both in that same.
I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. Today we speak about conscious parenting while facing collapse with journalist, podcaster, and deeply committed father, Rob Seimetz. All right. I am once again really humbled and very, very happy to have a special guest with us today on the Poetry of Predicament podcast, and that's with Rob Seimetz. And Rob, you've been with me, I think, on only one before, possibly two interviews. I'm not remembering well right now. But it seems like every time we talk, it's because I've been really moved by your most recent sharing about, earlier it was about being an expectant father. And now it's about various layers of your being a very active father now. And, I just each time have so appreciated being able to reconnect with your previous work about, covering so much of the critical issues of the day in either your writing or your podcast. And I'm back with you today, as we were just talking before we hit the record button, because we've got this special project brewing here in livingresilience.net. And that is to speak with parents in this time of collapse and predicament. And we're just getting a team together, and really, I think it's going to end up being a pretty large scale project, a lot of interviews with people from all walks of life and hopefully around the world, and in different levels of the socioeconomic conditions that are present, whether we're talking about in the USA or anywhere else in the world. And I just really looked forward to having you be one of the early participants in this conversation, because you just naturally articulate what's going on for you inside, and you include so much of your heart. You kind of remind me of Darja Mail that way. You cover what you want to be covering in an article or in a podcast, and then you bring up some of your own heart, some of your own experience, and just so appreciate that. And that's exactly what I'm hoping for in this project about parenting in times of collapse and predicament. So let me stop doing this long introduction and my appreciation of you taking this time to speak with us today, and just welcome you here and say howdy, and how about just checking in? How you doing? What are you doing? And then off we'll go.
Well, it's great to talk to you again, Dean, and I appreciate that you're doing a project. I don't see beaten around the bush, but not really attacked head on. So I think that this is going to be breaking new ground, and I'm really happy to be part of it in any way I can. I don't do the podcast anymore or the radio show. I just being a parent, I don't have time, especially when I have a 7-month-old. And I work on top of that. It's just, I don't have time to do it. I miss it, but it's all worth it, the trade-off. But I've been busy being a parent. They say that the first 2 years of a child's life is the most they develop. So I'm seeing changes every day and adjusting new routines, which I thought were once going to be one way, and now they're shifting to another. So my writings in the past and things that I've talked about, a lot of it's kind of been what I think the future holds. But one thing I can say about being a parent right now, at least with the phase my son's in, is I'm really living in the now. I don't have a choice. It's been and something I've really needed. So I'm appreciative of it.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing to just break for a moment. One thing I'm noticing is that you're freezing and breaking up a bit, and I'm wondering if there happens to be other stuff open on the computer you're on that might be taking some bandwidth. I'll do some looking over here too. I don't know if it's all right. Well, that's all right. We'll patchwork this together, and I'll just edit it into about here, where I'll mention that we've been working on our respective routers, and hopefully have a little less freezing and staccato talk for the rest of the interview. You were just talking about how you're really forced to be in the now, and that you're also forced to really just spend the precious time that you've got after working and having your life, which is a full plate on its own, that you're really just choosing the best quality family time that you can, is what I'm hearing. And I'm wondering if you could look with me at the stuff that you've focused on for the few years that I've been able to follow your work and so on. This is tough stuff, all of it. And you might not be involved with it on that daily basis like you used to be, but I know that you're still very, very aware. What I'd like to eventually get to is to find out how knowing what you know, being aware of what you're aware of in terms of what's going on in the world, has that changed you personally? And then has it changed you as a parent? But I'd like to start with another earlier question, if I may, and that is, could you just take a few moments and describe when you were growing up in your family environment, your neighborhood, whatever you remember from growing up, what did it mean to be an adult? What did it mean to grow up and become an adult? And what did it mean to be a parent? What did parenting mean? What were sort of the rules of the road as you were growing up, what did your parents pass on to you? What did you learn from other places, other input? Is that a clear question?
Yeah, I mean, from what my childhood was the perfect childhood, really. I had two loving, supporting parents who were financially stable, middle class house, didn't really have a care in the world. And
Yeah.
I felt like kind of my understanding as being growing up to be an adult is that you're going to be responsible, you're going to have your own life, you're going to be in charge of yourself. Um, and as a parent, I mean, everything I hear about as a parent is that you're supposed to be protective and shield your child and keep that innocence of them. And uh, what I wrote about recently and what I think about a lot is there's such an innocence with my son right now. And at some point, that innocence is going to wear away. And am I going to have control of how that happens or not? I don't really remember how my innocence was taken from me. I really feel like uh, a lot of my innocence was taken from me after college, to be
Mhm.
honest, that it kind of happened later for me. So I don't, I know my son isn't going to have that luxury. And um, I don't know. I don't believe in the myths of putting on a facade for your child. I think that that's kind of what I was told that I'm supposed to do as a parent, is I'm supposed to do these certain things and I've got to act one way or shield them from. Now I don't believe in that. I mean, maybe my mindset changes, but now I want to be real. I want my son to know who I am, the good, the bad, all of it, and not
Mhm.
put on a front for him. I don't think that's fair. And I've seen uh, parents who have done that to people I know that are my age, and it's damaged them significantly.
Yeah.
And I don't want to put my son through that.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And, it's an enviable thing, what you were describing about how you grew up and the conditions that you grew up in. It's the rare person that certainly I don't have, I can't say the same thing about how I grew up. It was definitely, single parent for most of my early years, and a lot of strife, a lot of hardship to live through and grow up in.
Well, I could add one thing too is right now I feel like what is happening, what your parents want for you is to give you the opportunities to take a crack at life and have it better than they had it, right? And right now, for me personally, that if you were to look at my life on the surface, my life is laying out that way, that it's going to get to that way. It's going to be better than what my parents' life, where at least the aesthetics of it are from this culture. But I know with what's happening in the world that that's not the case. And I know there's a little bit of a myth to that, because when I was growing up, my mom stayed at home. I mean, my mom ran a daycare at home, but I got to be with her when she did that. I'm in a household now where my wife and I work full time just to try to keep a standard of living that we had. So when people say that, I don't believe that at all, because I say that usually there would be a lot more parental presence, I would say, in the past than there is now. And that's what's really hitting me now as I see that, is that how much time I didn't realize where my time was spent. And now being a parent, you understand that quickly when you're taken away from your child a lot because of other obligations that you have to have your child survive in these set of living arrangements.
Right. And of course that opens up the gateway into the conversation about the fragility of the human systems. My buzz phrase for what's actually going on. I'm not a big fan of saying that climate change is the big deal. What it looks like we are in, to me, and is that we're in the midst of a collapse of Earth and human systems, one very important piece of which we call climate change. And what I was just hearing you point at was the human systems side. And when you and I talk, or actually, I've got to say, in your writings and in the previous podcasts that you produced and so on, you talked an awful lot about the human systems side of that equation and the fragility of it, and the kind of warning signs that would be showing up, in a particular episode or focus of your conversations with people. So you're just talking about one of the pieces that we rely on in this culture, really one of the cornerstones of the business as usual culture, is not only that, the next generation is going to do better than the last, kind of the lineage feel of it, but also that these systems that are in place, in your case, you were just describing two adults, two parents, each working full-time jobs, which takes them away, obviously, from being able to parent directly, hands-on, for some portion of the day. And all of that rings to me like extraordinarily fragile. Like, what might be the single card that gets removed that brings that house of cards, that delicately balanced house of cards, down. So I'm not trying to be a bummer here, but I am curious, does that fragility show up for you?
Absolutely.
Okay. Can you describe that, or
Sure. I mean, just a simple example would be how much daycare costs here. Daycare in Portland costs about $1,850 a month if you want to take your child to daycare 5 days a week. And some daycares will say, even if it's 3 days a week, we're charging $1,850 a month. Now that is extreme fragility for anybody.
yeah,
And I would say the big thing to me is fragility, and I think this goes for a lot of people, is health. I'm one health crisis away from the house of cards collapsing. And that's just my household right now.
yeah,
Getting away from what's happening, on the planet with, like you said, climate change. I feel like you're exactly right, is a symptom of the human systems that we have on this planet. And this is a symptom of its acting out of all the things that have happened. Authoritarianism right now, fascist movements that are rising and looking to blame identities or groups of people for that instead of the system for that, I think is acting out. These are things that are acting out.
right.
So I 100% agree with you when you say that it's human systems that are collapsing this planet and the life on this planet.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And, if I may, I think you joined in for a while on the webinar that I hosted this last summer, called Deep Adaptation in Times of Collapse. And there was really a beta test to see how successfully can this type of work be brought into an online environment. Some of it was live, some of it was articles and so on to study in between. And one thing that I found remarkably difficult in that environment to convey is the whole idea of self-regulation. So let me just give a little background to folks who might not know about that webinar and about this, these pieces. In an earlier podcast episode with a futurist and a systems designer named Joe Brewer, you know, I asked him, with all these incredible systems creations ideas that he comes up with, of, you know, how people could successfully live together if things were to, that house of cards were to fall apart, what would be a far more resilient and regenerative system for us to live in? And he has those ideas and he spells them out, and it's, you know, it's far more complex than stuff I can easily hold. So I asked him, kind of where I live in that conversation is, what are the inner tools that folks from their regular lives would need to be able to engage in these new systems, these new possibilities, and for that matter, to just thrive or survive well if that house of cards were to fall. And his answer was twofold. He said, and people would need advanced self-regulation skills and psychological flexibility. So he went on to more detail, and I'll put the link to that interview in the show notes so people can follow that thread. What I'm specifically asking you about, Rob, is this thing about self-regulation. They're kind of clinical words, so I apologize for that. The idea is, ideally, all of us have a zone of where we can live life, where we've got our wits about us, we're fairly present, we're fairly healthy, we're breathing, we're relaxed, we're able to interact in a good way. And then life comes along and can add stressors to us, and that can either knock us out of the top, the ceiling of this space, if you will, or it can knock us out through the bottom. And that means, like, if I experience a certain amount of anxiety, or something that makes me more anxious and intense in my behavior, that's probably going to bump me out of the top end, the ceiling side of this resilience zone in my behavior. If I tend to get depressed and I'm more contracted and I just don't want to interact with the world, that means I'm probably being knocked out through the bottom of that space. So I'm sorry for this long introduction, but I'm asking it pointedly because as human beings, in a world in which the levels of stressors coming at us just seem to be getting bigger and bigger. They're truly on a national and global scale almost every day, in my experience. So what I'm asking about is, how do we as individuals, and especially adults, and even more so as parents, how do we grapple with that tendency for life to knock us out one way or the other? And how capable are we? How much of a skill set do we have to get ourselves back on track, back in that resilience zone? So first, was that clear what I'm saying? And does it make sense? And then yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I actually wrote something about this recently. About the answer to your question. And to me, it's when I have control of my time.
Yeah.
That is when I'm in my good space. And like you said, when life comes at you, you already have all these obligations as is. And I would say industrial civilization already takes up so much of your time and obligates your time to so many things. And then life happens and you are just running around. It's like you're chasing your own tail. That is when I'm out of my zone.
Yeah.
Sure. And I see that with a lot of people. And
Right.
I wonder how people do that. Like, I have one child. I wonder how people do it with multiple children. I had one friend tell me when he had his second child, I literally don't have a minute to myself. That to me, like, is my worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Because how do you sit back and think about where you're heading and where you want to go? You need that time to reflect. I know Derek Jensen's called it the long, slow time where you get to kind of daydream and think.
Yeah.
And I think everybody needs that. And I think we have to, what I put in an article I wrote, was just something as simple as people talk about putting people in boxes or labels, like they're labeled this gender, this race, this socioeconomic status from this particular area or whatever. So we have all these labels that are placed upon us. And I think it's important we talk about these labels and we understand that certain people with certain labels are treated different than others. That is critical. And there are far better, smarter people that can critique that and talk about that better than I can. But what I do think we need to do to connect to people, regardless of what their label is, instead of if they're left or right or whatever, is we need to talk about time. That I want my time back. That if I have certain things in place for me, that's going to set me up to have more control of my time. Like, what if what if we pushed to work a 4-day work week instead of a 5-day work week? I get more of my time back. Medicare for all, I get more of my time back because I have more safety nets coming my way. As
Yeah.
opposed to when life happens, I have safety nets, because what's happened with this particular society is that we have started to isolate ourselves from one another when we have been a communal species. So they say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, I may live in Portland, but that village isn't here.
Right.
We are isolated. So because of this isolation, we need to break from it. So we need to do that, of course, but we also need to find ways to get safety nets for us with what this system is delivering to us and fight for that. And I would all for, if people wanted to say that means we need to have more of a communal society, I agree. But to be realistic about that, that's not going to happen overnight. You need to start with realistic changes that people are talking about, that it's on the tip of their tongues. And to me, those are simple things that you fight for right now. And with the end goal in mind, to have a radically different, more egalitarian society that truly cares about people in a communal setting. So absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a massive chunk, is to hear from you this, how does this notion of self-regulation show up for you, and to just drill down a little, another layer on that, if I may, because I early in my research to write my book, The Impossible Conversation, I was really curious. I kept asking questions like, what is being done? What's being offered now that people can put in their toolkit, their inner toolkit now? Like, doesn't take them 10 years to learn, and is not expensive to learn or to find out. And there was not very much, and this is about 5 years ago. There's more now, and I bumped into a few methodologies for people to literally, on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis in their lives, learn self-regulation skills. Like, if I feel myself being knocked out of that zone, first is a heightened awareness of that's what's happening, because most folks don't even realize that's what's happening. And then the next piece is, so if that's happening and I'm aware of it, how can I bring myself back? And perhaps even more importantly, how can myself and the other parent in this case, and ideally when they get age appropriate, how can we teach our child strong self-regulation, and what Joe Brewer was calling advanced self-regulation skills? So I'm curious, do you and your wife have any anything that qualifies as something that returns you both on a regular basis, you can rely on it, that if you do this either individually or together, it'll help bring you both back to that centered zone, to that resilience zone.
I think really my son is a great uh, regulator,
Yeah.
because you start to understand that your actions have consequences, and he's watching and observing that. Now, what I really I'm trying to do my best, and I failed at this, and I'm working on it, is to know that right now he's not at that age, but at some age, he's sooner rather than later, he's going to be able to articulate specific memories of things that I've done and how he felt in that moment, how that felt for him. It could feel very different than it did for me. So um, that's huge. I mean, when you talk, and I've talked to other parents where they've said, I have these moments with my son or my daughter where they're doing something and they're acting out, and I have to think about how am I going to respond to this, and how is that going to impact them psychologically. And that is just such a big question that I constantly think about. I mean, even as I'm living in the present with my son, I am living in the future with my son, and constantly thinking about things when he's able to talk and we're able to have conversations and he's able to make observations and ask me why things are the way they are. What
Mhm.
are going to be my questions to those answers? That's my wife is so good at right now and his development and everything like that,
Yeah.
where I am so focused on the future, and when he's older, when he's like 6 years old and above,
Yeah.
that's where my mind's at. So I think the fact that her mindset's in a different mindset than mine probably is a really, really good thing. Because if we were both in that same in the future mindset, missing what's happening right in front of our face. And my wife's a very thorough person. She's not going to do that. So that's probably a good thing, but it's starting for me, it's starting to understand my mindset and recognize as it's happening and say, this is happening right now. You know, stop taking things a day at a time, maybe take it an hour at a time. If we got to go down to a minute at a time, like that, start looking at things in smaller and smaller pieces as opposed to the big picture. Cause I'm always a big picture thinker. So it's that challenge of getting the picture smaller for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Um, so I got a two-part question for you. That's, again, given your pretty extensive framing, your view of the world, from your your prior focus on, so many large scale issues out in the world. I'm curious which ones still hold a bit of your attention, which ones still kind of niggle at your attention and have your have you be a bit concerned. Because I know you and I bet your answer would have been different 2-3 years ago, but maybe it'll be exactly the same. Maybe you'll say exactly the same things that were really hot issues that you were concerned about usually on the societal level is where we've taken this question before. And I'm curious, what are your concerns when you look out in the world now, in the world and the frame that you're in now?
For me, I mean, obviously, like you said, probably 3-4 years ago, my obsession was climate change. I couldn't get enough of it as far as reading about it, reading books, movies, documentaries, podcasts, you name it. I'm pretty sure I understand what's happening as far as climate change goes. Things are happening faster than expected. Most likely, we have tripped up, we've crossed the Rubicon as far as things that cannot be reversed, and it's most likely our species is going to go down with it sooner rather than later. I understand that. But what has my obsession now is fascism, far right movements and fascism. I've been devouring. I don't get to read books, so I find any subject I can on it with an audio book and listen to audiobooks about it.
Yeah.
It really concerns me because I think we're in it right now.
Yeah.
And I think just because it isn't like the fascism from, Mussolini's fascism or Hitler's fascism doesn't mean that we aren't in fascism right now. And I truly believe the United States is in it. And I'm concerned to the point where what's going to happen with this election if Donald Trump loses? Will he accept the results? I don't think he will. And he's been calling for civil war. There's a lot of people that for decades have been waiting for someone to do that. And it's not dog whistling, it's straight up saying civil war.
Right.
So that concerns me. And what concerns me too is what I hope is people that are concerned about the environment and capitalism and those types of things that are left leaning or are leftists. I hope they start to really focus on the far right and fascist movements, because I'll tell you that the far right and fascists are starting to take hold of climate change and spin that narrative to their narrative. It's increasing. You saw the Christchurch shooter's manifesto. He called himself an eco-fascist. Even the El Paso shooter wrote in his manifesto that if something along the lines of, I don't have the direct quote on his phone, but he said on here, he said, if we can get rid of enough people, then our way of life can become more sustainable. So you're seeing eco-fascism on the rise. And climate change is starting to become more and more undeniable. And what fascists do is they're constantly rebranding and putting their ideas into the mainstream to move people to their group. So I think it's something we really need to pay attention to, because with climate change becoming more undeniable, there's going to be a battle for the narrative. And we really have to win that narrative, I think, for our immediate safety.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I have to say that I'm not surprised by your response, because the roots of that response were in all the earlier conversations that we've had. Those have been very similar roots. So I appreciate the consistency and the clarity as always. So the other side of that question is, from this new frame that you're in now as a father and a parent, and actually having shifted your attention on a daily basis from, obviously, with the parenting shift, but also to not be so engaged with the writing and podcast generation and all that stuff. You have a different frame. You have a different way of seeing the world, and you've just been sharing a little bit about what you're concerned about in that new frame. I'm curious if there are any different inspirations or positive aspects of the world that you see in this new frame.
I think so it kind of sounds hypocritical, but in one breath I said that, earlier in this interview, I said that there really isn't, I live in Portland, but the village isn't raising my child. And that is true on a day-to-day basis. But to see the joy that a child can give to others, and to see people that understand my situation where I don't have family here, so I'm out on my own with my wife and my child, and to see people will be there for you if something were to happen, it restored my faith in people. which I think I needed, because I think what happens on people that really devour climate change and get into industrial civilization and all those things that we can discuss over and over again, but what I see people go to a place where they become human hating. And I don't think humans as a whole are bad. I think the systems that have been in place by some humans are really bad and have forced people to navigate their life maybe in ways they don't want to,
Hmm.
and don't and can't and can't do the things they want because they don't have the privilege to, and they're living minute by minute, day by day, you know, year by year. Um, so I needed that. I see that a child does bring joy to people. It does bring out kindness among people. And it does show the qualities that our species have that are great qualities, that we all aren't bad because we're humans. And I
Yeah.
think that's a very dangerous mindset to go down.
Yeah.
And I think that happens a lot with isolation. There was actually an article I just read in Wired magazine from Christopher Ryan. He does the Tangentially Speaking podcast, and he's wrote a book called Sex at Dawn. And he writes in this article, he talks about why are rich people so mean? Well, there's been numerous studies that have been done that shows the more wealth you accumulate, the more isolated you are, and the less sympathetic you are to economic inequality, to people that have much less than you. And the studies go over and over and over again and show this. I mean, and that was eye-opening to me. But it also reminded me that it's the systems that are doing this to us. We need to focus on systems so much when we talk about these things, and get back to how the system is doing this, not groups of people, whether it be certain races or our species as a whole. I
Hmm.
don't believe that.
Got it. So, like the self-regulation conversation, which is actually a broad and deep skill set that people can literally learn the skills, readily transferable and learnable skills in self-regulation. And my experience is that very few people have done that. Most everybody's got a little something. Now, there might be not so healthy self-regulation, like using, alcohol or drugs or sex or staying working or whatever allows us to, at a very minimal level, at least nudge back into something like a regular frame of mind or something that's familiar. Like self-regulation has learnable skills, I'm also seeing that one of another very, very common lack in the people that I'm often interviewing is having no idea how to get together with other people of similar interest, particularly around really highly charged or big scale topics like what we're talking about today.
Mhm.
And I'm inspired. I'm happy that you've just shared what you've shared, that you've got some number of experiences now of people showing up in a good way, and their essential goodness showing up is what I was hearing you talk about. And I think I'm hearing you say that's kind of on a random basis. It happens from time to time, and enough that it's inspiring. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and one thing I would add too that even makes it maybe more shocking for people is their belief systems do not match mine. You know,
Right, right.
and I think that that's reality. We need to understand that as things start breaking down, and you are relying on who's around you, they may not have the same beliefs
Right.
as you, but you need each other to navigate through the future. And like you said, how do you, if you can't even have a conversation with people that maybe overwhelming majority of stuff you agree with, but there's a couple things you don't, that's a big problem. It depends, but if it's minor disagreements, then that's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, just a brief aside, I don't know if you saw it a couple of weeks ago, there was an article by a guy named Jonathan Franzen where he was basically suggesting, what if we were to stop pretending that we're not in collapse? You know, the assertion of his article was, we're collapsing. You know, human and Earth systems are collapsing, and we are pretending that they're not. And the other side of his point in the article was, this is not an excuse for us to now throw up our hands and just give up and not do anything and just, you know, yeah, just give up. He goes through multiple layers of, no, this is the time to engage with what matters most to us each individually. You know, choose what you love and dive in and really give it your attention. When he posted that article, I think it was in New Yorker magazine, there was a tremendous amount of blowback that he got from kind of the call out culture in places like Twitter, where there were a number of people who were ridiculously close to him on the continuum that you were just describing, of, you know, politically and really their stance about climate change and so on, and they were just attacking. In fact, I don't know if you remember a science communicator named Kate Marvel, and she's one of the top science communicators in the planet, and she wrote an article in Scientific American saying, "Shut up, Franzen," you know, which is so out of character for her usual graciousness. And what I found in all those kind of attack and jab like responses to his article was this just this knee-jerk aspect of our culture, this shadow aspect where we just will attack anyone. As soon as that knee is tapped, we are on the attack. And so thank you for hearing me through this little loop. Why I'm bringing it up is, time and time again, when I'm having these conversations with people about, so what do you see are some of the biggest concerns for you, or what are some of the most important inner skills that we should have, that we might want to have as we look at facing this future? Another one besides self-regulation is our ability to come together with other people. Some people might call it a tribe, some might call it a support group, some might call it, you know, a once a month potluck where a number of people get together, and the key factor is, can they come together and speak about what really matters to them? And this is another spot where so many people are not very skilled at self-regulation. Also, many people are not at all skilled in calling together that kind of gathering. I'm curious, do you have a hunger for that kind of gathering at whatever scale, or do you have that kind of gathering from time to time? How does that live for you? Does it seem like an important piece, or not right now?
I mean, I did. There is a support group out here that I used to go to. I haven't had the time with having a child.
Right.
It's taken away everything, but I think it's a really good support group. I think people are really there for one another, and it's done in a really safe, caring manner. And I think people need more of that. one thing I see as a problem, and it kind of goes into this call out culture that you're talking about, is so, and I'll probably get called out for saying this because it may be controversial, but one thing I see from the right that makes them win so much more than the left does is the right as so I had a baseball coach who used to talk about, turning chicken shit into chicken salad, right? So take the shit that's given with you and try and make something of it. And I see the right do that beautifully. That if you read about fascism or fascist movements, they don't all agree with Donald Trump. And they just saw him as a vehicle to get their ideas out there, that he didn't have to have like pristine aesthetics and belief systems for them to jump on board. Uh, and
Yeah.
left, we're waiting for that perfect moment that'll never happen.
Yeah.
And I would argue is two things that are happening right now. One would be Greta Thunberg, the hatred that I see towards her from the left, regardless of whatever is behind her and maybe some of the people that are trying to influence her decisions. But the attack on her is it's truly sad to see that, and it's that helps me get out of it. It gets me out of that zone that you talk about,
Yeah.
because to attack her looks, to attack her personality, I find it offensive. I find it disturbing. Uh, why can't we take someone who's taking a lot of what we're all saying and is mainstreaming it and use that platform to get out some of our messages we want to get out, which
Yeah.
we will not do. And I would say the same thing for Bernie Sanders, is one
Yeah.
of the best organizers I know in this country, Vince Emanuele. I would tell anyone to look him up and see the work he's doing in Northwest Indiana. Is probably some of the best organizing you're seeing in the country right now. And he is backing Bernie Sanders, not because of Bernie per se, not he understands the flaws, just like I understand the flaws, but he is a vehicle that can be used to get some of our ideas out there in the mainstream. I don't think people understand in the United States, some people don't understand just how far right this country has gone. And it has been doing this for decades now.
Mm-hmm.
Clinton started it, and it's only shifted even more and more right. We need to get things going back to the left. And even it's not going to be this radical socialist government or communist government or anarchist or whatever you identify as in the snap of a finger. Trump was decades in the making.
Yeah.
So I hope people understand that, because my personal opinion is I'm not going to go out there and campaign for Bernie Sanders or things like that. But if he's the nominee and I have a ballot that comes in my box and comes through my mail, I will circle his name, which will take me all of 15 seconds to do, and send it back, because there are a lot of things out there that he is promoting that would make things better for a lot of people domestically. I understand his foreign policy. I understand the flaws with the Green New Deal. I get all of that. But I'm just talking about some immediate relief, because
Yeah.
there are some people that are really under attack in this country, and in a really, really bad way. And I feel like he's the only person that could potentially reverse, or potentially at least delay some of the right leanings that we're going through right now. I don't feel like the other candidates have a shot in hell at doing that, but he may. And I think people need to understand that and take that chicken shit some of his ideology is, and turn it into chicken salad.
Good. Well, thank you for that. And I particularly appreciate when you talk about various people that you're inspired by, or that really are exemplars of particular things that seem to work at a time when we are collectively starved to find things that work. So thank you for that. And I just want to nudge back into that last question, because I derailed you and I derailed us to, again, kind of a negative pocket. And I meant for it to be an opportunity for us to kind of end on an upswing, and really to let your heart just do a little free form associating, or some verbal journaling with us for a moment, and return to you to the question of what inspires you now, with all that shit that's going on, all that chicken shit that is very deeply covering so much of our world. Can you talk a bit about, when you look into when you come home at the end of the day, or you and your wife are looking each other's eyes at the end of the day, would you share some of the things that warm your heart?
I would say something that is very easy for me to think about would be um, people who truly want to make this world a better place. They're coming from a good place, and you see that in them. Despite it all, like you said, despite everything that's going on, they're still willing to fight, and they're still willing to put others' needs ahead of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
That is so inspiring. Um, to see kindness in this day of age is so inspiring.
Yeah.
Simple acts of kindness is, uh, you never know, and I would say this, that you never know what impact you can have on someone else. Um, and I have gotten to talk to some people lately who've kind of laid out things that they've been going through,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know that. And just trying to be there for them every day, and they've recognized that, and I didn't even know they were going through that, and that is inspiring. That tries to make me keep things positive. Having the innocence of my son right now helps that. Just the fact that my wife says he doesn't smile like that for anyone else but for you. He will only smile that way for you and no one else.
Yeah.
That,
Yeah.
trying to make those moments for him, and I know I'll never make moments like that for other people. It's a, father son bond is a different type of bond, but at least it makes me think, what can we do out there
Mm-hmm.
to bring joy to others? There's always something we can do now, and no matter what is going on, just know that they don't have control of your heart, and they don't have control of your mind.
Yeah.
And those are things you can control regardless of what's happening. And to see people that do that and recognize that is amazing,
Yeah.
especially when it comes from people who really, the most people I see it come from are people that really need help, but are too proud to ask for it, but they're constantly giving that to others.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Rob, you kind of were headed in this direction in what you just shared, but just in case you had anything else to offer, I consider you a ridiculously capable person to be speaking about the challenge of parenting in this world. And every time we get to talk, it's I just learn a huge amount, and I so appreciate the depth that you bring, the depth of your love, obviously for your son, your wife, your family, and the clarity with which you look forward into a chicken shit laden future, and how obviously you're doing that reframing that the coach was talking about. I'm curious if you had any words to share with other folks who might not have your background and um, your understanding of the dynamics of the world that you've been talking about in this conversation. Anything you'd suggest to folks who are trying to make this impossible world work, as parents, as concerned adults in this world, as folks who know that something's going wrong but don't really know how to even get their head above water to keep track of it, or much less make a difference in it? Do you have any suggestions?
I would just say to other parents that we're all just winging it. I don't know the things that I'm doing. I don't know if I'm always right or not, but just remember that. And one thing I've learned as a parent now, that I have a child and knowing what's happening in the world, is it really tests your belief systems. Take the time to figure out what your beliefs are. Something that I take solace in is I truly believe that however long I have on this planet with my son, that bond will not leave when myself or my son leaves this planet. That'll carry on. And I think about why I believe that. Sometimes we need to get back to why we remember why we believe what we believe. And I remember I was going through a kind of a dark path. I would say it could have been potentially a dark path. Is just after college, I started believing in atheism, and I thought I probably, if I would have read the wrong book, I could have went to Richard Dawkins or someone like Sam Harris. But I was lucky to read the right book, and I read a book by Graham Hancock called The Supernatural. And in that book, he talks about the person that discovered DNA, that they did these studies, and they realized that in order for cells to spontaneously come together to make proteins to make life, that's literally impossible. That doesn't happen. The odds of that happening are impossible. That something made that happen. So that's what I try to think about, is that regardless of what's happening, that as parents, I know it's stressful, and I know that parents that do understand what's going on right now, it's very stressful to navigate through this, especially depending on the age of your child. But just think about those type of belief systems. Is that something you believe in? Because that's something that I feel like in order for me to
Yeah. Well, once again, I so, and perhaps more than ever before when I've had the chance to talk with you, I so appreciate your time. And not to mention your heart and your wisdom, and now some solid parenting experience under your belt. I just so appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation and with this focus. And hope you don't mind if I keep bugging you on the occasional basis to keep checking in. I think it's the rare person that has so much to draw on, so much life experience to draw on, and then so willing to just generously offer whatever is your strongest suit to be able to offer at the time. I just so appreciate the heart that you bring to it all. And Rob, thanks.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the enormous challenges that you are taking on now and have been taking on. I feel like that you're creating a library for people to go to,
Yeah.
To understand how to live now. And that is so important. And I see snippets of it here and there, but I don't really see anyone taking the time to put it all together. And I appreciate that you are taking that time to do that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for those words. I appreciate it. And I'm so blessed to have an ever-growing team of folks who are committed to doing just that. And it's a joy. Oh my goodness, the amount of electricity that's in the space now to be able to create together. And I'll be sure to pass on your acknowledgement to them as well. Thanks you so much. And Rob, take good care, man.
You
Get
too.
yourself some, keep carving out little pockets of time here and there. I want to hear a major uptick in family time by the next time we talk.
Hopefully, yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much for taking this time, brother.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate it.
Talk to you later.
Okay.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.